Welcome to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where leadership meets behavior science and where educators, clinicians, and humans grow. I'm your host, Dr. Esther Bubb, and every week we'll explore the small, powerful behaviors that strengthen teams, inspire people, and create meaningful change. Whether you're leading a classroom, a team, a family, or simply leading yourself, this show is for you. Let's grow together, one intentional behavior at a time. Today's episode is personal because being a leader means being human, and humans do get overwhelmed. When the responsibilities keep growing, when the decisions carry weight, and when our plates stay full long after the workday ends, leadership becomes less about strategy and more about resilience, more about self-management, and definitely more about emotional regulation. And to explore this topic, I am so honored to be joined by a leader whose work, experience, and presence embody emotional steadiness and compassionate leadership. Dr. Natalie Hess, Director of Special Education and Support Services for the Brandywine School District. Dr. Hess has led special education systems at county-wide and district-wide levels across Iowa, Philadelphia, Delaware County, and now the state of Delaware. Her leadership touches thousands of students, families, and educators, and she leads with faith, clarity, humanity, and grace, often in moments where emotions are high and the stakes are real. So together we're unpacking what it means to lead when you're tired, when you're stretched thin or tested, and the behavioral science behind staying centered when it matters most. So let's get started. Dr. Hess, welcome to the show. Before we dive in today, what word or phrase would you say captures your leadership energy this week?
So I have to say energized. Returning from the holiday break often requires intentional focusing. And this week I felt both recharged and also highly productive because we had the opportunity to work remotely for part of the week last week. And it was uninterrupted space to engage and proactively plan. I had some ideas that I wanted to really work on, and that quiet time and space really allowed me to work on those, and I just felt very accomplished in that workspace. But I also had time with family that rejuvenated me. So I came back with a purposeful work plan after being able to meaningfully connect. So very much energized.
Thank you so much for that honesty, Dr. Hess. I think so many leaders will immediately see themselves in what you just shared. As you were talking, I was thinking, and what comes to mind for me was appreciation, but I heard you say energized, right? And time with family. Yeah. But I think, appreciation would also be a word that resonates with you as well.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. I want to begin with this idea, Dr. Hess, that self-management is leadership, right? So leadership really, to me, isn't just what we do externally. It's really how we manage ourselves internally. And in behavior analysis, we talk about self-management as a teachable, measurable set of behaviors. So according to Cooper, Huron, and Hayward in 2020 self-management, they defined it as the personal application of behavior change tactics that produce a desired change in behavior. So self-management, Dr. Hess, really focuses on individuals and leaders using strategies like setting reminders, planning, self-monitoring, self-evaluation, and even self-reinforcement to alter their own actions to meet goals, to improve their behaviors, and really, Dr. Hess, to foster a greater self-autonomy without relying as much on external support or control. So a powerful lesson often attributed to Viktor Frankl, who is the author of Man's Search for Meaning, is that between stimulus and response, there is a space, And in that space lies our power to choose. So from your perspective, Dr. Hess, how has self-management and your power to choose your behaviors for your self-improvement supported you in your leadership journey?
Yeah, I love this question. It makes me think deeply. I think it's the ability to pause, right? And to be able to choose my response has been foundational, really, in my leadership. I'm fully committed to the work that I take on. I give my absolute best in all circumstances. But when challenges arise, especially like when expectations or trust shifts, I use that moment to reflect on how to realign my purpose. Choose how to respond allows me to stay really grounded in my values and continue leading in ways that benefit students, staff, and ultimately families as well. But intentionally choosing to pause really empowers me to make decisions that strengthen relationships and also help organization move forward.
I love that, Dr. Hess. The pausing is something I do just, I really love to hear you say that. It's a distinction that's so important. And self-management behaviors such as pausing, which you so beautifully described, it really isn't optional at our level of leadership, right? Or even at your level of leadership. It really has to become a daily survival skill and really a responsibility for us as leaders. So let's talk a bit about self-monitoring. In special education leadership, as you know, the stressors are constant, right?
Yeah.
Crisis calls, compliance issues, challenging behaviors, IEP concerns, budgetary dilemmas, right? Ethical conundrums. There's like incidents, injuries, staffing shortages, and the list goes on and on and on. And all of these things require us to engage in active, collaborative problem solving. So you've led teams and systems across different states and settings, Dr. Hess, early intervention, K-12 special education, even related services, and district-wide initiatives. So, and you continue to lead daily at the directorial level. So with so many daily stressors, Dr. Hess, how do you notice when you're reaching your emotional threshold?
So I notice it when clarity, communication, or trust begins to shift. So support, defined by honest dialogue, shared goals, and consistent structures. They're essential for all of us. And when those elements change, I use it as a signal to me to pause, reevaluate what the situation needs from me. This reflection really helps me refocus on solutions. It realigns with my core values, and it helps me choose that path that allows me to continue contributing positively. I'm always moving towards something that supports growth and excellence. And so I think I'm looking for those shifts to kind of realign.
Wonderful. That awareness you just spoke about, knowing when you need to shift, knowing when you need to pause, that alone is so powerful. Because, there are instances, and I'm sure you've experienced as well, when leaders don't realize that they're dysregulated, right? Until they're actually in the reacting stage, right?
Yep.
So I'm so happy to hear that you've identified the changes in your behaviors that send you signals, right? Alerting you that you perhaps might get to a state where you become dysregulated. So before you get there, you pause, right?
Yep.
You perhaps take some deep breaths, right? And then that allows you to implement strategies that foster responding versus reacting, right? And then allows you to pause. I really love that word pause. I keep hearing it coming up, and I think it's going to be a lingering theme for our conversation this morning.
Yeah.
So let's shift a bit to behavior goals. Some leaders might say like their goal for remaining regulated is simply to not snap or to not shut down, right? But in applied behavior analysis, as you know, Dr. Hess, goals are specific, yes. Right? So for example, not snapping might be redefined as, just as you said, pause before responding, take one breath, ask one clarifying question. So these are all observable behaviors we can see and measure, right? And really helps us to assess our progress and our performance in self-management. So what are some examples of observable behavioral goals that you have established throughout your practice that guide you in tough moments?
So in challenging moments, my goals are to stay curious, remain aligned with the big picture, and ensure that all voices are genuinely understood. I tend to lead with urgency, but I've learned the value of slowing down when needed to build clarity and alignment. And tools like manager tools and structured frameworks help me communicate effectively and leverage diverse strengths amongst the team. A recent example, I think, of this is early intervention assessments. So I learned this week that VBMAP wasn't being used in our early intervention program. And so instead of reacting quickly, I guided the team through a 5S framework that we're using the book, Using Database Processes to Create Sustainable Change in Your School and Community. It's a step-by-step guide for leaders in education. It just came out December last year. It has really great current research. It's a really easy read, and it's very applicable for teams to be able to give some framework around how to help make decisions and do it in a way that guides the team. It's not necessarily revolutionary because the study, reflect, implement, plan, that kind of process has been around forever, right? But I think it's a refresh of that. And so my team is using this book study to guide our problem-solving practices. And so when I learned this last week, my team just met this week. The department met, and we took the 5 S's through the idea around, okay, what are we going to do to start implementing VBMAP? It's not like a light switch, right? You got to really be systemic and thinking through how this would work within the district and how it would build out over time. And so ultimately through that process, we targeted starting very, very small, being very, very strategic in a pilot, and ensuring that we build both meaningful and sustainable change. And so that's just one example of, I think, how to react when faced with a major piece of information that change needs to happen. But it can't happen immediately. It's going to take time. And so how do I help my team get through that? And how do we all learn and grow together so that everybody's working towards that same goal?
Wonderful. That is such a great example of turning intention for change into actual observable behavior that I believe started with the selection of that book you referenced, right? Yeah. And so coming up with steps. This is a long-range plan, but here's where we'll start. And as long as we continue to follow those steps, we're going to get there because we're going to continue to support each other, right?
Right.
So let's talk a bit about cues and prompts, right? Common terms in ABA. There are two well-known behavioral strategies that apply, in my opinion, perfectly to self-management and emotional regulation. So, for example, to manage my completion of tasks, Dr. Hess, if I'm for example, in a meeting and I need to work on some things immediately after the meeting ends, I always just write self-cues, for example, a short phrase on a Post-it that's immediately available to me. I place that Post-it right next to my keyboard, and as soon as the meeting ends, and I go back to completing those tasks, right? So that for me, it's like a cue. For me, an example of a daily question-based self-prompts I use is asking myself, what's the most important task I need to do right now, right? So that's just me talking to myself. That's self-talk as a prompt to ensure that I'm prioritizing from my long list of tasks to ensure that those tasks that must be completed promptly, I'm working on them, first. So for you, what supports do you build into your daily routine, such as reminders or setting boundaries to help you stay grounded?
So I am better in the morning than I am later in the day. Okay. So I really like a strong start to the morning. And so I always get there 30 minutes to an hour before the start of the actual workday. It helps me to get things organized for the day. Mm-hmm. But I also have established a leave time. And this has been relatively new to me. But it's over the course of my leadership time that I've also established a leave time. And I think that's really important for balance and presence, right? Yeah. But I also do weekly check-ins with my team to ensure steady communication and to build trust and to prioritize systems to make expectations transparent for everybody. So I meet with all of my directs every week to make sure they feel heard and that I can support them. I think relationships are the cornerstone of my leadership, and I approach each day with the intention to listen, connect, communicate, and really do it with clarity, but also kindness. And I think that these habits really allow me to show up fully for my team, but it also helps our students and families that we serve so that I am present when I am at work.
Yeah. And Dr. Hess, I really appreciate that response. And it's so profound. And I'll tell you why, in my opinion, it is. Because I really asked you about yourself, but you extended it to your staff, right? So you were not only thinking about yourself, but how can you make sure you're also supporting your team? And I really love how proactive that response is. You're not waiting for you to burn out. You're not waiting for your staff to burn out. You're really designing protection and embedding that into your leadership style. So I really appreciate that honest answer. And I also have to say, the lead time, that made me smile. That truly resonates with me right now. So I really appreciate that is something you shared, and that's something you're doing. And I believe that would be something that's so beneficial for our listeners to hear. So let's move our conversation to reinforcement, but more specifically self-reinforcement, right? Those things that we do after we engage in specific leadership behaviors to motivate and encourage ourselves to keep leading, despite all of the stresses we are faced with, to keep going, to keep inspiring others, to keep building, and to keep changing systems and lives. So, for example, positive affirmations and self-talk, treating ourselves, or even posting a note. Sometimes I do that, Dr. Hess, like I post a note on my computer screen of like a recent accomplishment so that I'm seeing it daily to keep myself motivated. So for you, and to close out our conversation on self-management, how do you reinforce yourself, right? How do you acknowledge your progress without guilt, without perfectionism, or without comparison to others?
So I reinforce my growth by intentionally documenting it. Like, I update my resume annually. I write my own evaluations. I collect weekly evidence that aligns to the leadership standards. It really helps me stay grounded in the impact of my work. Rather than comparing myself to others, I'm trying to measure my progress by making a difference and recognizing the difference that I'm making in my own growth, and with my team. And I think this practice really keeps me motivated, but also focused on continuous improvement, because you get to see it firsthand and it reminds you. So I keep that document file, it's called evidence, on my desktop. And every week when I'm sorting my documents into the folders, I do it with intention, and I file it in. It makes you look at those standards for leadership and say, how does this work align to what I'm supposed to be doing, right? I'm pouring my energy into these tasks and these things, but it actually has bigger meaning, and it does tie back to what I'm supposed to be doing. And let me show myself how that happens, right?
Yeah.
So I think doing that activity supports my growth, but it also helps me see a bigger picture of how we're having an impact.
Wonderful. I really love all those strategies you shared, and I'm telling you, I'll be, implementing some of those. And I really appreciate, your candidness, because, self-reinforcement and self-management is often the missing piece for high achieving leaders. And leaders do not talk much about self-management publicly. So I really am going to keep saying I appreciate you joining me today for this session. But, please sometimes pause to think about it. In my opinion, self-management is the foundation of our growth, right? Or progress or achievements, and I think your ability to self-manage and self-reinforce really speaks to your achievement and your ability to lead and support others, but also energize others, right? To continue to make progress as well. So, and I think it's one of the reasons, Natalie, Dr. Hess, why you're able to lead others or lead people you support from where they are to where they could be. And I often say to myself, if we can't manage and regulate ourselves and our own emotions, how can we model regulation for anyone else, right?
Right.
So exactly, right? And then how can we manage? I believe once we're able to manage ourselves first, then we are better positioned to support others in meeting their own self-regulation goals and needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's move into resilience behaviors that we can teach ourselves. So In shifting into resilience, I think of it, Dr. Hess, not as a personality trait, but as a set of behaviors that leaders can teach themselves, they can practice, they can repeat, and, they can strengthen over time. For me, it isn't necessarily pouring through or pretending we aren't tired, right? We have to admit that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really all of the small habits that keep us centered, including all of the ones you shared. And the one that's really resonating with me a lot is that one you talked about, pausing, right? So often resilience is characterized as bouncing back, but to me, Dr. Hess, it's really based on the sum of my lived experiences. It means so much more to me. It means,
Yes.
it begins with the self, right? So
Yep.
self-compassion, self-love, self-forgiveness, self-grace, right? And
Yep.
then those things allows us to be vulnerable. It allows us to remain determined. They allow us to keep moving forward after downfalls and setbacks, right?
Yes.
Regardless of whether those downfalls and setbacks are private or public. And then, Dr. Hess, it really gives us the courage to return and be proud and be
Yes.
brave and even stronger than we
I
were
agree.
before we experienced that emotional turbulence. So it reminds us, Dr. Hess, to be true to our authentic selves. We are who we are, right?
Yes.
Embrace those imperfections we survived, build new connections and pathways, meet new people, and say things like, I am worthy enough. I am more than a conqueror. I am a believer. And I know this experience will strengthen my foundation. So, Dr. Hess, let's talk about 5 specific observable and measurable behaviors that build resistance. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective. So one of those things that you already mentioned, Dr. Hess, is pause or reset breathing, right? So for me, I like to use the one, it's commonly referred to as the box technique. So like
Mm-hmm.
you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold empty for 4, right? What is
Yeah.
a pause or specific reset breathing strategy that you've used to help you regain clarity and compassion?
So pausing has elevated my leadership by helping me draw from my rich variety of life experiences, both joyful and difficult. From parenting blended family to the advanced degrees I have earned to the career transitions I've made, each experience has heightened my empathy and deepened my ability to connect with others. That pause allows me to reflect, reset, and then respond with compassion. It reminds me that our shared humanity, much of what you just talked about, is our greatest tool to collaborate and collectively succeed. So I really strongly believe that along our journey, these experiences are strengthening us to be a better partner, to be a better person in every relationship that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That pause you described again, it's really a perfect example of how a few seconds, Dr. Hess, can change outcomes. So let's talk about the second behavior, scripting in charge moments. So for me, those are moments that help us regulate so that when we respond instead of reacting. So for me, some of the things I say to myself are, this too shall pass. Esther, you need a moment. I need a moment. Or I'm in control of how I feel right now. Take a deep breath or just breathe or, take a moment. Give yourself grace. I've been saying those words to myself a lot more recently. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I vocalize those externally or I say them just to myself, right? So that's self-talk. So do you have scripts, Dr. Hess, that you're willing to share that you lean in on, in difficult conversations or difficult experiences?
Yeah, I often use the prompts that are help me understand
Mm,
or what I hear you saying is. I think those phrases really create a space for others to share openly and help me ensure that I'm interpreting their perspective accurately. Because when people feel heard, we can move forward with greater clarity, trust, and a shared purpose. So these scripts support these constructive dialogue and lead to better outcomes. And that's why I like to use those. I know that a person's perspective is their reality. And when I am most frustrated in a conversation, I need to make sure that I'm not trying to just respond with what I think, but to better understand that person's perspective so that I can clearly communicate with them.
wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So what I hear you say is and help me understand. I love those scripts. I think they're two perfect examples of how it can help us self-regulate in difficult conversations and difficult moments. So behavior 3, Dr. Hess, is boundary setting. And I believe we will both agree, I really think we'll both agree that we understand what it means to set boundaries, right? And we take the
Yes.
steps that we need to take to set those boundaries. However, I believe we will also both agree that one of the indirect outcomes of COVID-19 is that surge in accessibility as the world
Yes.
transitioned from brick and mortar to virtual platforms. So I remember prior to 2020, for example, IP meetings occurring in person and multiple locations. There was drive time, there was travel time, right?
Yeah.
So that meant, as we both know now, significantly fewer IEPs, per day before COVID-19 to now significantly more. And simultaneously, breaks between meetings, also erased because virtual meetings often are scheduled back to back without breaks in between. So in today's leadership pathways, leaders then must navigate and distinguish between accessibility and availability, set even clearer boundaries, and ensure that they communicate those boundaries with those that they lead. So how do you, in our era of accessibility and availability, and everyone wants us to be immediately available and to respond immediately, how do you set boundaries with your team members, or how do you ensure that you structure your workload in a manner that is least likely to result in emotional strain?
Yeah, so I'm really intentional about modeling healthy boundaries. So I avoid contacting staff on the weekends unless it's truly urgent. And I work with my team to establish priorities and realistic timelines. I encourage them to tell me early if something needs to shift so we can adjust it together. This approach really reinforces accountability while also cultivating psychological safety, but also mutual respect, right?
Right.
So those are some strategies that I use to model those healthy boundaries, is really reinforce, and I set it as a expectation around how we work as a team, that we're not contacting each other on those weekends, and that we are setting deadlines with intention to help us move the work along, but also that vulnerability to say, I'm not going to make it. So how can we readjust, right?
Yeah.
And still meet the goal of what we're trying to achieve.
Wonderful. I really love that you use the phrase model, and I'm hearing the word intentional a lot. And, those are going to be takeaways for me today from our session. But, modeling, again, is something we do in behavior analysis, but that when you're setting that example, people see it and then they begin to follow along, right? So I really love that example. Let's talk about behavior 4, recovery and restoration. So when I think of recovery and restoration behaviors, I think of actions we can engage in to refuel, our emotional tank, so to speak, right? So behaviors like eating nutritious foods or resting or exercising or even joining support groups, right, can help us recover and restore ourselves as we wind down daily. So what are some behaviors you engage in, Dr. Hess, to restore yourself after a demanding week, and rest and reset for the week ahead?
Yeah, so time with my family is my reset button. That's why I am really intentional about leaving work on time, making sure that I have dinner with my family as a priority, right? And then being present in those moments, but celebrating wins and appreciating one another, recognizing strengths. It grounds me and brings me great joy. I also find energy in acknowledging others. Celebrating the good work in the people around me connects me back to our mission, and it reminds me of why the work matters. So I'm always asking my staff to seek the gold, find others who are living in the mission and vision of the organization and recognize them. Help me help them in celebrating the good work that's happening. Because everyone wants to receive that sense of accomplishment and feel good, but you receive that also when you recognize others. Right. And so I think it helps to build a culture that we're looking for the good in the work that we're doing when we recognize and celebrate the good things that are happening. And so I focus on those things, family and embracing others in their good work.
I love that. Family, 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 and embracing others. And I heard you say, recognizing others really supports their continued growth and progress. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's talk about behavior five, or fifth behavior, or last behavior in this list, which is cognitive reframing. So to me, cognitive reframing is all about looking at our experiences through a lens that reduces stress and increases our sense of peace and control. And I will say for me personally, Dr. Hess, this is something I'm very big on. It's
Hmm.
something I really stress with my daughter, and it's something I stress with my staff always. So, for example, the one I can tell you I talk about all the time, Dr. Hess, is characterizing mistakes as learning opportunities instead of as
Yes.
failures, right? Viewing not being invited to a colleague's, retirement or going away party as normal life rather than rejection.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't they invite
Yeah.
me, right? Or reframing feedback from a supervisor as nurturing growth as opposed to saying I failed, as opposed to telling ourselves we failed and saying, you know, um, I'm sorry I didn't do that. Instead of saying that, just say, thank you for pointing that out, right? So really that cognitive
Hmm.
reframing to reduce our stress levels. So how do you personally reframe moments of stress or challenge into positive experiences?
So I bring the team together. I think complex problems require diverse perspectives, and that collaborating allows us to find our solutions that no one person could generate by themselves. This approach shifts the challenge from a burden to an opportunity to innovate, build trust, and strengthen the team. It reinforces the idea that we're better together. And that is something I strongly believe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So what I love about everything that you shared so far is that it's nothing is abstract, right? Resilience isn't a
Yeah,
personality, it's practice.
right.
And I've heard so many exemplars in everything you've shared so far. I hear that you live it daily, you see it daily, you talk about it daily, and you support yourself with it daily. So again, thank you so much. I'm really loving our conversation so far. So we're getting close to the end. Let's move into the final, big major topic for today, the leadership regulation toolkit, right? So as leaders, I believe we should all have a toolkit, such as you've mentioned to me in my mind certain examples already, such as writing, notes to yourselves, or evaluating yourself, or updating your resume
Hmm.
every year, right? So to me, I think of the toolkit as a collection of go-to strategies that support our own self-regulation. So in my toolkit, I carry four strategies that help me maintain equilibrium. The first one I use, so 2-1, it's like a 2-minute centering ritual. So for example, take a breath, compose my posture, attend, and, state my intention. So in moments when I'm stretched thin, I tend to engage in those behaviors. I mean, even this week, I can recall just telling myself, take a breath. I compose
Hmm.
myself, I focus my attention, and then I silently to myself state my intention in that moment. So what's one
Yeah.
centering ritual that anchors you?
So meditation plays a significant role in keeping me centered. I work to begin each day and end each day with mindfulness. And during tough conversations, I intentionally slow my breathing and pause before responding. This small moment of intentionality really helps me stay present and grounded. Pausing, not reacting, has become one of my most effective leadership tools.
Wonderful. I love that. So my second tool is like a 3-question reflection cue. So in moments when I'm tested or stressed, I might ask myself, what's driving my reaction? What outcome do I want?
Mm,
What
yeah.
behavior will get me there, right? So which
Hmm.
one of those 3 questions resonates most with your style of leadership, Dr.
So I am outcome driven and
Hess?
and
You are.
motivated by clarity of purpose, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
once the desired outcome is clear, I break it into actionable steps and build a plan to include continuous feedback. I think
yeah.
this approach keeps me focused, organized, and also forward moving. Even during complex and emotionally charged situations,
Hmm.
knowing that we have this action plan and that
Right.
we've come together to create it,
Yeah.
um, really is what I lean on.
I love that. I love that. And just, I heard you say knowing you have that action plan. A lot of times knowing there is something in place just is already removes the stress because all we need to do is refer to it, right? And I think that
Yes.
that insight you shared is going to land deeply with so many of our listeners. So tool 3 in my toolbox is a micro restoration habit. So for me, it's like small intentional actions that are completed for about 30 to 90 seconds, to reset my nervous system, refocus my mind. So again, we already talked about a lot of these, but like reset breathing, pausing before responding, that internal scripting, reframing, and boundary setting. I'll tell you, Dr. Hess, quite honestly, my go-to is pausing before responding to emails.
Yes.
That is my go-to.
Yep.
So what is your micro restoration habit?
Mine is this too shall pass. It reminds me to look beyond the moment and to stay anchored in perspective, purpose, and long-term vision, right?
Yeah.
This too shall pass.
I love that. I really love how practical that is, and anyone can walk away from listening to our episode today and implement that immediately. So the final tool that I'm going to share in my toolbox is the kind of the clear script. And I'm going to be honest, Dr. Hess, I use this one a lot, right? And I'll tell you why. It's sort of like a script. It provides a polite but firm statement while remaining respectful to set boundaries. So I often use those kind but clear scripts when I'm interrupted. So I know, and I'm going to be honest, this is something we're all working on as leaders, because trust me, I also interrupt others when they're talking, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say I'm working on this every single day, Dr. Hess, and I engage in self-talk, right? When I recognize that I'm about to interrupt someone, to remind myself to just pause, as you've been saying throughout the session, until they are finished sharing their thoughts. So when I am interrupted, I've been working on saying something using a kind but clear script, such as, I understand you really want to share your thoughts, but please let me let me finish this thought, and then I'd love to hear your perspective, right? And I've been trying to do that a lot lately, because it's helping me work on myself so that I'm not interrupting others, but helping others work on it as well. So is there a phrase you use to ground yourself when tensions are high?
I think that I will also want to respond to them in a way that lets them know that I need to be heard too.
Okay.
And so I think that I will ask them to give me a chance, just like you said, right? Give me that chance to complete, and I would love to hear what you have to say. Here's the remaining piece of what I had to share with you, and then I would love to hear how you see that in action, right? I want them to know that, because I need to also feel valued, right, in that relationship. And so by taking that time to take a breath and then say, I need to share with you, or finish sharing with you, this concept, and then I would love to hear from you. And it gives an opportunity, right? But for them to reflect on, whoa, I was kind of railroading it. You know what I mean? Without saying you're railroading it.
Exactly. Yeah. That is such a beautiful example, how you phrased it, because it really talks about at the same time, maintaining boundaries, but then doing it with compassion, right? Like understanding they really want to share their thoughts, but supporting them, just holding on just a little bit, so you can continue to say what you have to say. So you're respected, but then at the same time, you're validating them as well.
Right.
So my final question for you today, Dr. Hess, is, what are 3 practical strategies? Now, you shared a lot, so maybe you have a different 3 you want to share. Maybe you just want to pull 3 from what you already shared, like the 3 practical strategies that listeners should really walk away with as something that they can implement today, tomorrow, to lead with resilience, to lead with self-management, and to lead with emotional regulation.
I would say listen to your inner voice. Self-awareness is the foundation of strong leadership. I think lead with your heart, prioritize meaningful connection, and communicate with empathy. And third would be to reconnect daily with yourself, but also with others. Relationships fuel resilience, and intentional conversation cultivates clarity and balance.
Wonderful. I love that. I couldn't have summed it up any better. So thank you so much for your insight today, Dr. Hess. I appreciate your wisdom, and I value your heart. I value your grace, and I'm really proud of you, all of your accomplishments. And I thank you for your steady leadership, all of the steady leadership that you offer in moments where maybe you're not even aware, but where it often matters most. So I thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, I echo the same to you, Dr. Bubb. Thank you for having me. This has been a fantastic opportunity to share with you.
Thank you so much.
To our listeners, leadership is not about perfection. It's about progress. It's about presence. It's about awareness. It's about choosing again and again to lead from values instead of urgency. Take one tool from today's episode and practice it this week. For me, I'm going to continue practicing pausing before responding. Another tool we talked about is being intentional. We also talked about setting a boundary that protects your energy and your emotional space. Because regulated leaders create regulated teams, and regulated teams create regulated environments for children, staff, and families. So join me next time for episode 4, where we will focus on the science of motivation and the art of leadership. Until then, lead with intention, lead with clarity, and lead with heart. Thank you for joining me on Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. If today's episode inspired you, share it with someone who leads, teaches, or influences others. Remember to follow the show and leave a review. It helps us reach more changemakers like you. Until next time, keep leading with clarity, compassion, and purpose.